Hello, everybody. Dave Crawford, Director of Training, CASA Trinity. This is part 2, evidence-based treatment of substance abuse, stages of change, stages of treatment, stages of group, how it all goes together, and how it can work if we work it. The key thing there being, we have to work it. We have to utilize it. We have to adhere to it, not rigidly, but to some extent, if we are going to expect it to work for the client. And this is part 2, so I'll do a little bit quick refresher. We talked about the stages of change, stages of treatment, stages of group, how they all go together, how every treatment agency that I've worked at or am aware of has based in this model, how Transtheoretical model, stages of change model is kind of the guiding principles of what we do. And it's about outcomes, client's behavior, and matching interventions and services to where that client is at in the process. I already did part 1, and it was we talked about a lot of things. I'm not going to go over all that. This is part 2. So as a refresher, we'll talk a little bit about the stages of treatment, stages of group, and the stages of change are all evidence-based practice and perspectives that to be effective must be utilized as intended. Give me 1 second. I just want to make sure everything's right here. All right. An example that a client presents in the pre-contemplated stage and is actively using, let's say the client has low motivation to change, no intention of really stopping and are resistant to treatment. I don't need to be here. I don't know why probation. I only had a few positive meth urines, that kind of talk. Clients should be considered an engagement and stabilization stage. Again, engagement and stabilization stage is very early in the process, and maybe again, when we adapt more of a harm reduction model, I think officially we could say that it's the early active stage of treatment, but right now we're going to separate that because all the community stuff we did to get this person to even be in our office is part of that engagement stage as well. But this is still part of the engagement. We're trying to increase client buy-in and stabilize the client. That's what we're trying to do right here in this stage. I lost it. Consider an engagement stabilization stage. However, perhaps the client uses not at a level that severely has negative impact to life and meets a mild to moderate diagnosis. In this situation, you can start a client ERS to see how they will do. There is a chance that because their function level is higher and the impact's not as severe, they might also have better insight into like the consequences of continued use, and ERS may serve to engage the client in recovery. So that is the one exception. And the example I can give is you got a client that definitely drinks to a level that's a problem, has full-time job, has had a couple DWIs in treatment and still kind of resistant, but also recognizes they need to be there, are talking at least that they're willing to do what's necessary. Even if it's like at this point, they're just willing to do what's necessary and stop using the 10 group because they got this legal thing hanging over their head. That's still a starting point. You know what I'm saying? And that's why that would be ERS appropriate, because ERS is still, even though more part of the active stage of treatment, a big core of ERS is early skills and still using those precision strategies. So because the client has better insight and maybe a higher function level, and I don't mean it like function levels we think of the developmental disabilities, but I'm saying you got someone that's homeless living underneath the bridge. They're in survival mode. Basically, they're not even ready to even look at this. Their trauma is so severe that all they really can be driven to do is all they can think about is use. Is more of a dependency thing versus an abuse thing. And I talk about it in a different training, like the DSM is still one thing that I've been in this game one way or another since the 90s. And I think I've seen so many great changes. And even the DSM-5 is great, and it helps us kind of flush things out a little bit better and kind of offer more services. The way they do diagnosis now with the mild, moderate, severe, back in the day, it used to be use, abuse, dependency. If a client for DSM-4, that's how long it's been. For the DSM-4, if a client just met use, had a couple criteria, 1 or 2, then they weren't even coming. Abuse would be like kind of more that client with alcohol that I just described, that may not necessarily dependent where they're drinking every day at 7 in the morning to stop the shakes, but every weekend they're partying hard. It's more of an abuse diagnosis, or like a college kid. So in our new DSM-5 setting, I think the thinking should still be that way. Do you understand? So like a mild or moderate diagnosis, because again, still, even though we don't say use anymore like they did in the 4, the use one would be the one we don't recommend treatment on. You know what I mean? Because not everybody that uses alcohol or some substances definitely meets criteria. It's all about how it negatively impacts their life. So being that they met some criteria, mild or moderate, that would be more appropriate for ERS. You get what I'm saying there? And then again, because we don't know, we're just meeting this client's first time, we can only go what they're telling us and what we got for evidence from whatever mandator or evidence we gather during assessment. We still might not know fully. We might think it's a mild or moderate, and then come know, find out the screen to initial urinalysis we did, they talk about they're just drinking on weekends and they only describe 4 symptoms. We give them a moderate diagnosis. And then the first urine screen we do at time and assessment comes positive for cocaine and heroin that they didn't even report. So now we got to look at some different things and maybe want to revisit that treatment recommendation. However, if they are what I described and being honest and their use has had negative impact, that they're in the contemplative stage, and even if they're just willing to do it for the mandator, that would be a time you might want to start an ERS. We talk about that other level, the severe diagnosis and kind of pre-contemplative, or maybe even a little contemplative, but resistance to any stopping at this point when we need to stabilize because fear of overdose, fear of overdose is there, or fear of safety, or clients homeless and using with no intention to stop. Then we're going to be looking more at the inpatient detox, intensive residential, or IOP or stabilization. Do you see that difference? So it's not that everybody that comes into the door at the assessment and is kind of actively using needs to go into those higher supported, more structured environment types things, but we need to use our impressions, our experience, the research, the literature, and what we know is work to kind of wrap that client in services. So again, active use at assessment doesn't necessarily mean they stabilization, then it's about severity level. I hope that makes sense. Pre-contemplative stage. So we're going to unpack these a little bit further on how they're going to apply, and then we'll wrap this all up. Pre-contemplative. It isn't that we cannot see the solution, is that we cannot see the problem. So in pre-contemplative, we're not even thinking their problem exists. Pre-contemplators usually show up in therapy because of pressures from others, spouses, employees, parents, and courts, and they are resistant to change. When their problem comes up, they change the topic of conversation. They place responsibility of their problems or factors such as genetic makeup, addiction, family, society, destiny, the police. They feel the situation is hopeless. Treatment engagement in general. Treatment engagement refers to the process of initiating and sustaining the client's participation in the ongoing treatment process. And that is what we're trying to do, especially in these early stages. Engagement can involve such enticements as providing help by procuring social services such as food, shelter, and medical service. Engagement can also involve removing barriers to treatment and making treatment more acceptable. And that one too, I know in the last video I talked about like our CCBHC case managers, honey workers, SOAR, Cody, peers. Like as we're trying to build this relationship, if we can put things in, there is a behavioral component of that. Not only are we helping the client and doing our job by getting these things in place, we're also developing that therapy relation, showing the person we're on your side and we're here to help you. So it is very important, especially in that engagement stage, to show kind of the benefits of like taking this path. You understand? Life can get better. We are kind of like putting our money where our mouth is by showing that life will get better if you go down this path. You know what I'm saying? Like you will no longer live underneath the bridge. You will no longer like be hungry for food. You will be able to like get some stability in life and get children back, and you'll be able to avoid jail, you know, things like that. Like these are all treatment points that we're making and using during this early stage. And I think that early process and that engagement process is critical. Engagement begins with efforts that are designed to enlist people into treatment, but is a long-term process with the goals of keeping client in treatment and helping them manage ongoing problems and crisis. And that's what we're doing later on when a person gets stable. Like it's a artificial environment in a way. It's kind of like a practice thing, but we are there to support them because they might be with us 6-8 months. And during that time, they're going to experience life. And in life, their kind of maladaptive coping mechanism has always been use. We're there to support that and teach new skills and new ways to cope. That's our goal in the active recovery stage. And also to continue to support and help progress towards goals. Essential to the engagement process, a personalized relationship with the individual over an extended period of time and has a focus on the stated needs of the individual and what we see. The needs for engagement occurs when a person is not connected to service and can be broken down in 2 stages. Pre-engagement, and this is where earlier in the last train I talked about, like it's almost like there's some harm reduction strategies all the way through the engagement and even kind of first initial preparation stage of change, early active, where it's pre-engagement, you know what I mean? But then once the ball's rolling and they're in the door and attending regularly, then we're in the engagement and keeping the rapport thing. The person does not have contact with a case manager, mental health counselor, or substance abuse counselor and meets criteria for a substance use disorder in the pre-engagement stage. So there's no contact. We're trying to increase contact and opportunity to do so. Engagement stage, the client has had only irregular contact when assigned case manager or counselor and meets criteria for substance use disorder. So the engagement stage is maybe they're not in the door in the group chat or even turning the assessment yet, but they're meeting with one of our community programs regularly. Or engagement could be that we have them in stabilization group and they're attending maybe 1 to 2 a week, and 50% of their individuals were in the engagement stage. You know what I mean? Do you see what I'm trying? Like this whole thing, I've been trying to see where that, like that engagement and early active treatment stage are just a fine line, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? But we're in the active treatment stage, even if the client's still showing symptoms and using when their behavior suggests that they are engaged. That's when we start the active treatment stage. You know what I mean? Pre-engagement, the person does not have, I already went over that. Case manager and meets substance abuse criteria. Interventions earlier about building rapport, showing the person you're on their side. Engagement is strictly harm reduction and involved in such enticement as providing help by procuring social services, food, shelter, medical service. Engagement can also involve removing barriers, setting up MAS, giving rides if necessary, and making treatment more accessible. And that would be like if maybe they're not quite ready to, or even to look at, or maybe they end up not needing a better program, but like we're offering that and we're having like a place that they can walk in every day and get help if they want it. You know what I'm saying? Like you're creating availability. Community work is crucial component of engagement, can involve service from ACT teams or CCBHC case managers, CODI teams, linking clients to a honey worker, SOAR, peer engagement. Some peers have, like, especially we work in some small communities where some of our peers have personal relationships with the clients from back in the day, that might be beneficial. Like, hey man, come on. So these are the kind of tricks we're using and the tools we're using at this stage. Engagement, the client's only irregular contact and assigned case manager because they're coming once in a while and kind of not fully there yet, but at least they're showing up. Interventions may include detox or inpatient referrals if the client is willing, residential referrals if the client is homeless, or linking the client to outpatient service and daily stabilization engagement persuasion groups. Engagement can also be enhanced by providing adjunct services and events that may appear related directly to disorders such as childcare, if that's a barrier, and we can hook it up if we know a free program or a grant-funded program, or maybe, I don't know, we're in the process of merging. I think they have a childcare, the place we're merging with. Maybe places offered internally childcare. We can move that barrier, we should. Job skill training, counseling, recreational activities, like anything that we can enhance the client's interest in. And if we can kind of like show that, yeah, we're on your side and we hear you, you know what I mean? It goes to that person-centered piece too, but it also kind of increases buy-in and enhances the alliance. It may also be persuasive with the use of extrinsic motivators, such as working collaboratively with mandators in an attempt to reflect the severity of consequences of their continued use to get client to go inpatient or improve attendance by keeping things reality-based and consistent reminders of cues of their extrinsic motivators. The primary goal of engagement is to assist the client in any way we can to engage in active treatment. I want to touch on this for a minute, and I also think I do in the next slide. I'm going to take complete ownership. When I first made this training, I used the word coercion there, but then I took it out, and because it is not coercion anymore. It is not. It is persuasion, and it is reality-based. You know, again, I've been doing this in one way or another in this game for a long time, and I think back in the day, it was more common. Coercion didn't quite fit, because that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is doing our job, and I'm talking about working with mandators that like we're supposed to, and the client knows we're supposed to. You know, if a client is getting sent to us, even though like these places don't tell us what to do, they are our partners in this, like what we're trying to achieve. And in this day and age, they're just as committed as to us. And I've said this in numerous training as the client's success, and they want to help. And God, I worked treatment court for a couple of years, and don't get me wrong, sometimes like the client got sent to prison, but also just the involvement in treatment court, it opened so many doors. And I worked treatment court back when insurance was like such more of an obstacle, and there was this right to fit, like they had a fail first thing. And sometimes places would cherry pick, insurance would be like, so like just even the fact trying to get a client to a better program came with so many more obstacles than it does today. And in treatment court, all I had to do, I get a court order. Treatment place had to let them in. You know what I mean? There's nothing they could do about it. Insurances had to pay. And like, so things like that. And the reputability of the treatment court and just the emphasis it puts on when you're working. everybody wants to have, and every county has a treatment court, and every agency wants to have a good relationship with treatment courts. So even if like I'm at an outpatient and I'm trying to refer to an inpatient or a residential, intensive residential that I don't work for, they too want to look favorably on treatment courts. So I think they're going to pick up the pace a little bit. So like there's so much benefits with working with these people. And I think it's not coercive. It can be coercive. It depends on the way we're doing it. It's extrinsic motivator persuasion when we just establish from a door, hey, I see you coming today. I got to get this consent signed. You know, like part of this is I got to update them, but I'm going to update them on all the great things you do. But if, you know, sometimes we got to be issues because we work together with treatment court, or, you know, and that's just one example, you know what I'm saying? And that is why I changed the word. Like if you're holding it over their head, like a hammer, stick, do it or else, now you're being coercive. When you're just doing your job, it's a persuasion thing. And once the client's like on track and doing well and they're going and getting accolades and positive affirmations for wherever their mandator is, family court, hey, good job. You know, we're going to start getting supervised visits as you're making a lot of progress. We think it's time, you know, it's like that kind of stuff. That serves our purpose. And it increases that intrinsic motivation, because that's the key. I'll completely acknowledge the extrinsic motivators, and using them are not going to like keep a person sustained in recovery, but they can be very helpful in getting the process started. It must be noted at any stage of treatment, but especially engagement and persuasion stage, where building rapport and trust is core element. Using these persuasion strategies I just said is not holding that stick over the head and being like, do it or else, go to group or I'm going to tell on you and you're going to go to prison or anything. That's not what I'm saying here. It's not what I'm saying at all. And I think that there's a deficit in this currently. And I think it varies from reasons. Maybe clinicians just don't give a damn and they're feeling a little burnout and they're like, screw it, I don't care. You know what I mean? Or maybe they have this kind of transference, counter-transference thing going on where they want to be the hero and protect the client and kind of like hide and shelter them and make sure nothing bad happens. Maybe it's a misconception of what working collaboratively means, and just you feel treatment is not meant to be punitive, which it is not. But again, if the client is being mandated, that's their life. And the reality is they are involved with those systems. So we need to update these people, and we need to provide accurate and regular correspondence and updates with it. So that is the part that it can be more an extrinsic motivator in early recovery. And now on the flip side of it, if you're using it like you better do what I say, or I'm going to call your parole officer, now you're being punitive and now you're being coercive. And that's why I changed my wording when I put this together. It does not involve getting frustrated and calling or emailing managers like such and such, just he was acting this type of way and that pissed me right off. And I know we're not going to say it that exactly, but like you got to be professional when you're doing it too. You know what I'm saying? And you can't, if you're already like reporting that way, you should look at that. If you're feeling you had enough and the client deserved punishment, you're doing it wrong. You know, because that's not what we're doing. We should have no personal feelings about this client like that. You dig what I'm saying? Yes, of course, we're trying to have a personal relationship to some extent, but not like that. If they're upsetting you, if they're frustrating, now we're getting some boundaries, transference, counter-transference stuff, and the stuff we need to seek supervision on. I'm talking about regular communication and collaborative care with people just invested in this person's progress and removing their barriers as we are. Do you understand? And don't get me wrong. I mean, sometimes that person ends out of rope, and sometimes that person like kind of just spits in the face of these mandators. And that's the difference what I can tell you today over back in the day. Back in the day, if a person screened positive one time for even a substance like cannabis, it was highly likely they were going to face some negative consequences. It's not like that. And I think if all you look in your heart, you look in what you're seeing in practice, it's not like that. These places want to see them succeed too. You know what I'm saying? All right, so I already touched on that. You're doing it wrong, and they're not persuasion anymore. You cross over instead coercion, and you also crossed over some transference, counter-transference stuff, most likely. Using pervasive strategies based in reflection or even amplifying these extrinsic motivators is strictly goal-oriented. It has the goal of being engagement, of using these motivators enhances the client's intrinsic motivation. So I already started on that. So it's not going to hold or sustain a person in recovery and abstinence, but it very well might help to get the client started. I mean, I think we all heard that faking it till you make it. Maybe the client's not even ready to fake it yet. It's kind of working with these people to at least get the behaviors faking it, hoping something's going to click. It ain't always going to work. It might take a couple tries, but it kind of have an effect. And I highly recommend that if you're not doing it in your practice, you start utilizing it in an appropriate way more often. It involves setting the patient to start that we do our job and we work collaboratively with these managers and communicate regularly as we are required to do so. It involves transparency and consistency, which is like letting the client know upfront that you're required to do this and make progress, and that any private conversations or disclosure will always remain that way. So what I'm talking about is that I'm always clear with that. Like when they ask I've been asked, I'm sure you have been asked, what do you report? I report attendance, I report urine screens, and I report anything relevant that might come up related to that. If there's like a reason that I have to explain why something happened, you know what I'm saying? Other than that, everything's a secret and I'm not reporting any of that. Like anything you share here on a personal level or emotional or history, like that's not going to be shared in any of my reports. And I think that's important as well for anybody watching this training. You still want to keep that confidentiality. You still want to keep that trust. And if someone's sharing dark, intimate secrets, it's not necessarily if we report it that mandator is going to be like, oh, or I'm so sorry that happened. They might not, but if it's ever dropped or mentioned, that's going to do something to your allowance. And the client's like, damn, man, I get why they had to report that I was positive, but why they had to tell this person who I didn't want to share my childhood trauma, why did they disclose that? And that's the stuff you got to be careful and find that balance. You're like, if maybe some of you are not old enough to remember, even it's a little bit out of my time. I think I only know it because they made a movie of it. Dragnet, strictly the facts. We're here to report strictly the facts. That's what it's about. Strictly the facts. No subjective part, no emotion part, no intimate details the client shared, just progress and treatment. You dig what I'm saying? And treatment plans and recommendations too, obviously. You know what I'm saying? All right. Will always remain that way, but required to report things such as attendance, urinalysis results regularly. And with that one, I don't think I mentioned it, so I'm just going to say it quickly. I think if a client's ever positive, you need to first give the opportunity for them to report on their own. There's a therapeutic element there of accountability and being willingness to look at the problem. And it gives them the chance that then you were kind of clear too, like you didn't report, you knew I was going to. However, on the flip side of that, do not just take the client's word they reported, because they will lie to you. You know what I mean? Love them dearly and they're great, but like sometimes they're like, yeah, I told them that's great. I remember when I was a kid, I got in trouble at school. I'm not even going to say what it was. It wasn't horrible, but like they're like, we want you to tell your father. And then I went home and I didn't tell my father anything. And then the next day, the principal was like, how'd it go? I was like, oh, it was like, yeah, he was upset and this and that, but like we got through it. And they never checked. That was stupid because I didn't tell my dad anything about what happened that day because I knew he was going to be angry. You know what I mean? And I didn't want to deal with that. And it's very similar, like that feeling can definitely be brought into that kind of thing because legals do have a more punitive, even though I do believe we're at a time and place where they're trying not to be punitive and trying to work with just the fact that eventually can lead to negative consequences. There is a fear there. So you can't take the word. You get the client opportunity, you check with them. They say they did it. You call and confirm. Do you understand that? You got to call and confirm. You can't take them by their word. You know what I mean? I wish that we could, and there will come a time you will be able to, but early on, especially, definitely you got to make sure that was done. Strategies include weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly updates. So even that part of it, like even it's not about if you're doing it regularly, it's not even about anything like that. It's just what you're reporting and what happened since the time frame you last reported. And with the client present whenever possible. So again, like obviously set the pace that they know you're doing it, but if you can do it in session with them, I think that goes a long way too. It's not going to always work that way, but if you can. Strategies also includes their negative reports, such as positive urine screens. Give the client, I already talked about, give the client the opportunity to first report to that mandator. It must also be noted on the other side of this persuasion strategy I'm trying to lay out for you today, not doing it. What not doing it does. And again, I said there could be a lot of reasons. There's different reasons for different people, I think. Some of them, it might be a fear of being the bad guy. Some of it might be like this reflective hero, want to be the ambulance thing. Some of it might just be that you don't really give a damn. Or maybe we're burnt out a little bit, or maybe we just don't really like that client. All those are not good reasons to reflect. All those come into boundaries and transference, counter-transference that you're probably going to take later in this kind of learning plan. The failure to reflect the severity of the client's reality or what the consequence may result in non-compliance with mandators, it can be crucial. And I think that's the part that we fail to realize. Like, let me read what I say and I'll talk a little bit more first. Not only are we missing an engagement opportunity, an opportunity to increase client motivation to change, it could be the clinician's fear of being viewed as a bad guy. It could be false feelings of pity or feeling bad for the client. If we start doing these things that look like we're hiding up, covering up, or not just want to take the time to work collaboratively with these real forcers, we're causing client harm. We truly are. And I think unless you understand how these systems work, you definitely just need to do your job here and like report. Because while our lack of communication transparent may give the client more time and more rope to hang themselves, because that's exactly what it does. if we're not taking it serious, they're getting the impression it's not serious, and we're kind of like, we ain't gonna do it, or maybe we're on their side and they got more things to. If they're not ready, they're going to take advantage of that, is I guess what I'm saying. If they're not at that place where they're ready to like understand that maybe it's not some transference countertrends. Maybe it's just core belief that you feel the punitive thing, like I mentioned earlier. If you're given the impression that you're not going to do your job, a client who's not ready to receive that in a positive light, I shouldn't say not do your job. To not report to mandators, a client who's not received that in a positive light and understand maybe where your feelings and thoughts are coming from, they're probably going to take advantage of that. And eventually what happens is, because the legals, like, they know, and I've seen it when I'm working with new legal systems. Like, I'm working with probation and parole and just knows me when I have a relationship, or treatment court, they already know I don't have to do this. But I have seen, say I'm starting with a new someone in a different county, and initially they're a little weird with me because they get this bad taste in their mouth because they've had some negative consequences where the clients have manipulated people before and they're frustrated with treatment. So they're kind of a little stamped. But as they get to know me and see that I'm transparent and open with this and that I'm trying to engage them, 95% of the time, I would say it is effective. You know what I'm saying? Once in a while, I mean, legals can be jerks too sometimes. So that does happen on occasion, but typically they're on the same page as us. So eventually, if they were seeing these behaviors and I'm not reporting it, and maybe like, oh, they're checking with me, hey, I just screened this client and he was positive for meth. How's he doing there? And I say, oh, I ain't screened him in 3 weeks. And he hasn't been to a group once in a month. They're in their mind like, why the hell have you not told me this was going on? So now they're thinking that this client's got you beat. And if they keep saying and continuing use and nothing happening, they're a lot quicker to just throw their hands up and kind of bring those consequences that are coming down on them. Whereas if we're being transparent and we're communicating regularly and like we're making a collaborative effort with client, legals, mandators, family court, and us all involved, that is a different thing going on there. And if slips happen and they know that, and as long as we're being like honest about it and demonstrate that we're working towards like meeting that need, they're going to like work with that client. And that's what we want to like encourage and enhance. And that's definitely part of this. Contemplators acknowledge that moving on to contemplators, acknowledge that they have a problem and begin to think about solving it. Contemplators struggle to understand their problems, to see its causes and wonder about possible solutions, but they are at least there to that point where they're recognizing something's going on that's not very good for me. Many contemplators have had indefinite plans to take action in the next few months. So like, even though I know this happened, I'm going to get to it later. You know your destination, even how to get there, but you're not ready to go yet. That's kind of how that sums that up. It's not uncommon for contemplators to tell themselves that someday they're going to change. When contemplators transition to the preparation stage of change, their thinking is clearly marked, beginning to think more and more about the future than the past. At the persuasion stage, the client is having, this is the stage after the contemplator. At the persuasion stage, the client is having regular contact with a counselor, but there is no shared agreement to work on substance use related issues. So they're commenting and they're like, hey, this is starting, maybe I should check this out, but they don't really at that point where they're taking direct action, or if they are, it's very early steps, just like the actual attendance is by definition action, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're in the action stage. Does that make sense? That's kind of where you're in the persuasion. There's not increase. There's a little bit of action. Talk is definitely action driven, but there's not a lot of real action yet. That identifies the persuasion stage. Before the counselor can begin to work on discontinuing the substance use, the client must decide the use of the substance has negative consequences, then discontinuing use is an important goal. But therefore, the goal of this stage is to persuade the client that substance use is a problem and obtain agreement to work together on treating it. For example, this may include helping the client see the substance use interferes with the ability to pursue and achieve personal life goals. Early persuasion, the client has a contact with a case manager counselor, continues to use the same amount of substances as reduced substance use for less than 2 weeks. Not necessarily stop, so he's not direct action, but maybe there's a reduction there, like an early step, and still meets criteria. Intervention at this stage would community engagement, stabilization services, and outpatient or inpatient setting, working to establish stable housing if needed, and other social services that support recovery. Late persuasion, the client has regular contact with a case manager counselor, shows evidence of reduction in the past 2 to 4 weeks, fewer substance, smaller quantities, or both, but still meets criteria for substance use disorder. For both the stages of persuasion, the interventions are the same: continue to develop alliance, build rapport, support the client in their goals. Interventions at stage, community engagement, stabilization services if needed, work to establish housing or any other thing that would support recovery. However, the key difference between these stages of persuasion and treatment is an indicator of what stage to change the client. If a client is demonstrating the behaviors mentioned above, seems to demonstrate increased motivation to change, is coming to appointments regularly and kind of working on goals, smaller reduced use or stop use at all, but still meets criteria, which suggests they move to the persuasion stage and are ready to engage in the active recovery stage of treatment. That's the difference there. During the active treatment stage, the client is motivated to work on substance abuse and demonstrate behaviors that suggest a wanting to move the relapse prevention stage of treatment. Readiness to move to advanced recovery and relapse prevention is demonstrated through behavior that shows increased motivation and discontinued use for 2 to 3 months. So again, like early sustained remissions, like 6 months, client might not always have that, like we're graduating them, say they do PRS and recovery enhancements, no slips. That means they got about 4 months in abstinence. They're not necessarily relapse. They're not in the relapse stage of treatment, nor in the maintenance stage of change, but we are beginning to plan and put in place services to support that when they get there, even if they're not going to be with us, or maybe they will be through continuing care. Do you get what I'm saying there? For early active treatment, the client is engaged in treatment and has reduced substance use for more than a past month, but still meets criteria. In this an active recovery stage, the client should be connected to any social services for recovery and have stable housing. And outpatient, the client should be early recovery groups. We're talking about the early active stage, where persuasion discrepancy building should still be part of the curriculum, not necessarily geared toward moving out of ambulance, but to increase client motivation and buy-in in the recovery process to keep the client engaged and motivated in the recovery. Education will be part of the early recovery action stage. Sober supports, coping tools, kind of like that, building that core foundation of what's going to sustain long-term, and that's personalized for the client. Continue to develop therapeutic alliance and consistent and clear affirmation of progress made. Always important. You're doing a good job. Keep it up. Down on anything we can throw at you, whether verbally or environment, like certificates sometimes, like especially embedded programs, accolades from any mandators, family involvement. They might say, hey, good job. Anywhere we can say like some positive reinforcement things, you're doing a good job. That's what we should do because we're trying to get buy-in. And that also comes into play in a more active stage, but in the earlier stage, we're kind of using it to kind of increase motivation. In the later stage, we're kind of like acting. I really believe once a client's on course, doing well and making like sound decision makings, we're really no more than like a sounding board, a cheerleader in there to say, good job. You know what I'm saying? Like the job. That's why I think that substance use gets a bad rep sometimes. It can be very hard early recovery, but I think when we get clients to the advanced recovery stage and some positive things going on, that's when our rewarding and what we do matters. Like we get to see the fruits of our labor type of thing. And that's the reporting part. Advanced active treatment, the person is engaged in treatment and has not met criteria for substance use in the past 1 to 5 months. The stage of treatment would include intervention gears toward developing a sober support network, self-help attendance, and social support. Relapse prevention and relapse prevention planning, also important in this stage, and to continue to develop coping skills, reestablishing family and personal connections, re-entering workforce, or any other vocab goals, completing GED, going to college, taking a trade school, access VR, all that kind of stuff is good at this stage. In the outpatient setting, clients should attend active recovery groups for curriculum designed to educate and support the above mentioned tools. So everything, that's what we're doing in those acting stages. So stabilization, early recovery, all about persuasion, increase in buy-in. More active, advanced recovery skills is about giving the tools necessary, support necessary, and kind of like, I lost my train of thought there. I'm going to try to make it. The coping skills necessary, we'll say, to live life on life terms and like live life abstinence and substance free and continue to grow and develop, whether with us or without us or in continuing care. And kind of that's what the advanced recovery is about. When a client is in the last stage of treatment, relapse prevention groups are nearing completion of active recovery stage, and treatment even more emphasis placed on self-help, sober supports, and relapse prevention plan, the stuff that's going to sustain recovery and allow the same kind of similar. It's moving, like I said earlier in the training, or maybe it was the last one I made, that in some ways we are an artificial environment with a practice setting to like get these skills, a core of them. The relapse prevention, maybe a good way to look at that is ways to sustain the client in the real world doing on their own. That's the stuff we're working on. So like whatever they may need, maybe they're ready to get out of treatment, but they still say, hey, I need to like a group setting once a week, and we're going to encourage AA and NA and that kind of thing. In relapse prevention stage, the client has stopped using substances or experiences no consequences from substance use for a significant period of time. The client is engaged in treatment and has not met criteria for substance use disorder in the past 6 months. So this can vary on part. Relapse prevention stage can be on their own sustained. It can be the last couple of months if they're with us. It can be the last couple of months followed by continuing care. You know what I mean? But the relapse prevention stage is about maintenance and sustaining recovery. And more, I would say it is, the self-directed part becomes more and more, I'd say. Like it's always there and we got to work with, but early recovery, it's more about selling and persuading, those kind of tactics. Advance is more about enhancing it and teaching skills necessary to make good choices and whatnot like that. And the client self-directed fully. Intervention in the stage of treatment will include enrollment and participation in continuing care programming and continuation working on goals and development of sober support network, self-help, social support, relapse prevention. I already talked about these a little bit. Reestablishing families and personal connections, entering the workforce, VOCAD, GED, college, all that kind of stuff. So that is it. That's what I got. The two trainings together collectively kind of describe what we do and what our core is. And I'm assuming we all know it. So just a reminder for that. Maybe you're new to the field and figuring it out. So this is a guiding principle for that. Because again, there's so many pieces of this puzzle, and there's so much that we bring as individual professionals to this field. And it's all part of it, and it's all so important. But this transtheoretical model, stages of change, stage-wise treatment, that is our core and guiding principles and the framework we need to be judging ourselves, our clients' outcomes, and the client's motivation to progress on this path towards sustained recovery, early recovery. It's this stage of change, engagement, stages of treatment, engagement, persuasion, active maintenance based on where the client's at. I mean, that just covers the whole playing field from, again, worst case scenario, client under the bridge, shooting a bundle or 2 bundles a day, all the way to that same client a year and a half from now is getting married, buys a home, and is halfway through a college degree. That's what these stages of change and stages of treatment and the recovery process. Again, it's just a neat and pretty thing I put out with a bow on it, but that is the core of what we're doing. So that's all I got. It's been a pleasure. I hope you guys enjoyed the training. If you have any questions, feel free to email.